Robert was abbot of Molem, a Benedictine monastery, but he felt uneasy about the influence of the lay patrons, and he felt that there was a need to have freedom, to have a monastery just following literally the rule and without any interference from outside. He found a place in the present Cito, Cistercian, which was at the time in need of everything, but everything happened because there were muscles, and the Cistercians were going to be precisely people of muscles, manual work, not living off lay patronage. But nevertheless he had to return after founding to his own monastery of Molem, and it was Abbot Alberic who took over. He was very strict. It was his successor, St. Stephen Harding, an Englishman actually, who found the balance which enabled the order to grow very quickly. And because of the growth, they had to have a charter, the Charter of Charity, which bound them all together under one spirit and indeed one observance. It was a moment of providence when young Bernard, a very young man with influence over other young noble men, came in not on his own but with 30 young, energetic, noble friends of his, all together into this, what has become known as New Monastery by that time, the New Monastery. It was obviously felt to be an adventure with a future. So he entered, and after his profession he was sent to make the second foundation of that growing monastery. The first foundation had been La Ferté, and then Clairvaux became the second one, Clear Valley. They followed eventually Pontigny and Morimont. Morimont means death or dead to the world, and so they were. St. Bernard became known in the whole of Europe as time went on because of his gifts of preaching and calming. It was a difficult period in church history because there had been the election of this anti-pope, and they were trying as best they could to maintain Europe under one pope, the true one, Innocent II. And so he was called all the time from his monastery. He was friendly with the great people of the time, including St. Norbert, who kept also Germany faithful to the true pope. He was also called upon to preach the Second Crusade when things became very rough in the Holy Land. But his heart was in the monastery, and in his quiet moments he was able to write, which led to his being proclaimed by Pius XII, the last of the doctors of the Church. Anyway, he wrote these wonderful works on Our Blessed Lady, to whom he was very devoted, and the order has always been very Marian. To this day, the Salve Regina is solemnly sung at the end of Compline. So we have from that house which he founded, Clairvaux, many other houses being founded in a short time. This here represents St. Stephen Harding sending out a group of monks to found new abbeys. We have the founders of the daughter houses, La Ferté, Clairvaux, Pontini and Moribond. It's an old manuscript dating from 1243. And here we have what happened. From Clairvaux came many monasteries, and from then we had the family tree, which led to the huge colonization of Europe by this movement. It was from Clairvaux that they came to England. The first house was Waverley. They also came to Wales in Gwynardaf, Whitland, where, as it happens now, there are Cistercian sisters, nuns. And as he had this friendship with the Primate of Ireland, St. Malachi, at his request they came here to Mellifont. And of course Mellifont is linked with his name because he's called the Doctor Mellifluous, the honey-flowing doctor. So Mellifont, fount of honey, is here. And from there came these others, the daughter houses of this monastery, which became known as the Great Monastery, Monastery Mor, and all these others in blue came from here. This is where we are here. They're all over the place, even as far as this island in the sea. As time went on, even Cistercians got involved with commendatory abbots, and that was a bad turning point, because when an abbot gets the benefit, the economic benefit of being an abbot, as though he were entitled to it because of his birth, but has nothing to do with his monastery in practice, it leads to abuses. And hence it is that we find Providence intervening again in the 1600s, when one of these commendatory abbots in question was touched by grace. It was Armand de Rancé. He was the best friend of Bossuet, two great scholars at the Sorbonne. One came first, the second in the final exams, and they remained faithful to the end in this friendship, which was based on the Lord. But Abbé de Rancé, having been touched by grace, decided that he would reform completely La Trappe, which was a Cistercian monastery. It had actually been founded not as a Cistercian monastery, but as a house of the reform of Savigny, around about 1142. In 1147, the whole of the Savigny reform came under the Cistercian reform, and so that's how it became part of the Cistercian order. It is interesting that the house actually, although suppressed during the Revolution, was able to come back into existence because the community was not extinct. It carried on with great success in exile, La Val-Sainte and other places, and they came back. And it happened that in the 1800s they had also a very strong abbot, Augustin L'Étrange. L'Étrange became very much a stern but loving abbot who was able to give a stamp to that house, which kept it going as a reform house. Under Pope Leo XIII, the three existing reforms of the time, Le Melleret, Septvon, and La Trappe, were all brought together as one order, the order of the Cistercians of the strict observance. He did, therefore, for the Cistercians something similar to what he did for the Franciscans, making the various reforms reduced into the OFMs, the conventuals, and the Capuchins. So, when this happened, there were to be henceforth 2 general chapters and 2 orders. The Holy Order of Cito, the old order which is still in existence, and the Order of the Strict Observance. And from La Trappe came other houses, including the retaking up of a monastery founded already, I believe, from Clairvaux in Rome at Trefontane. And at Trefontane one sees the Virgin with the words under her, Ave Maria, Ave Bernarde, because the story is that so great was the devotion of St. Bernard that as he passed a statue of Our Lady, he would always greet her, Ave Maria, and in this particular case, she answered back, Ave Bernarde. Hail, Bernard. And so it was that they came back to Ireland from Le Melleret, and from Ireland they went to England and founded Mount St. Bernard. I believe also they went to America and founded New Melleret, and on the family tree went until recent times. When I was 20, I got to know La Trappe for the first time by going there for the summer, and it was under Don Gérard. He was of the generation which had been formed before the council. Some modifications had happened under Don Gabriel Sorte, who was abbot of Bellefontaine, one of the daughter houses of La Trappe. He died in 1963, and the changes that he had done were minor, but they made things more streamlined with regard to the liturgy, because it was quite heavy with regard to repetition of psalms. However, he did not change the discipline. That was something which changed only in the years following the Second Vatican Council, and that depended a lot eventually on the individual houses. La Trappe itself opted to change very little, but when there was pressure being put on them to change certain things, Don Gérard himself preferred to step down from his abbacy, even though he was still in his prime, as it were, and room was made for somebody to come from another monastery, and Don Irénée was sent from Tamier, but died after 3 weeks, following which the prior, not the abbot, the prior of Montdécat, Don Marie Gérard Dupont, came in, and there, when I was there, I could see that he was making quite a few changes compared with what I'd known under Don Gérard before him. However, it was always a fervent house. Interestingly enough, what has happened in the years since then is that the house which has kept most of the continuity with the past is a house which had a very young abbot when I was in France. He was the youngest abbot in the order, only 32 years of age or so, and he, when he became abbot, decided that he would maintain things, and very little has changed in the observance of Ceffonds, also called the Saint-Lieu, the holy place, which explains why, if one is really looking for Cistercian life as it was before, you would find it there right now, and it explains also why they're beaming and bursting with vocations. They have 90 in community. And the Cistercian nuns, the Trappistines, in Italy at Ritorchiano, have the same pattern, and they also have 90 in community, very young, and able every so often to make a new foundation. And so it is that the pattern emerges that when there is reform and return to the roots, vocations follow. The houses which have abandoned things tendentially have also lost numbers. There's a tendency now to bring monasteries together, and therefore that leads to closure. We see here what actually is going on. The monks themselves are building their monastery. The difference, of course, between the Cistercians and the earlier monasteries is that the Cistercians are no longer going to depend on gifts and benefactors. They're going to be functioning and economically self-sufficient. They become experts in agriculture and in the whole wool industry, therefore sheep. Also, under Stephen Harding, the habit of acquiring lay brothers dressed in brown comes into play seriously and makes it possible for the choir monks to spend a lot of time still in choir while work is going on nevertheless. Lay brothers quite often couldn't read, and they had a simple office made of vocal prayers, Our Fathers and Hail Marys essentially. But they had a contemplative life similar to that of St. Joseph, and St. Joseph is always present in their life in the form of statues where they're working. The pattern of the monasteries is always the same, and that is something which unites them even physically. And even customs were the same until essentially the years after the Second Vatican Council. Two bells were allowed, and the two would be rung on big feast days. That's the case at least in the Reform at Trappes. One characteristic was the fact that in the Reform at least there would not be individual cells but common dormitories, and one was sharing a common solitude, what would be called le désert de Cîteaux, the desert of Cîteaux, where the solitude was made of silence. And that is something which was very attractive. The virtual wall of perpetual and unbroken silence, in which no energy was lost because there was no leakage, and the soul had its secret, known only unto God. And so it is that when I took the habit, I wrote these words, aware of the beauty of disappearing from the eyes of the world and being seen and known only unto one. It was Quasimodo Sunday, that's the Sunday after Easter. This was written immediately after taking the habit. O day of days, who thought I'd see thee rise behind these hills, these sacred hills, that now enshroud the paradise of home. My eyes behold at last the unseen heightened flow of time enveloping this little corpse. For I am dead and buried. This new state to which I rise is pure as snow. nor warps its slender beauty any untamed fate. For on this day arisen, I now live, the day that will repeat itself, till days repeat themselves no more. Vast Sito, give this newly born what this word, Trappist, says, of those who say no other. Here I live, where Trappists lived before, now dressed as they, who came unheard, and unheard went their way. Mater misericordiae, vita dulcedo, et spes nostros a te clamamus, exules finis, a te suspiramus, gementes et flentes, in ac lacrimarum vale. Ergo advocata nostra, illos tuos misericordes oculos, ad nos convertum. Et Iesum benedictum fructum ventris tuum,